Chapter 45. Right this way, the sheriff ordered his soldiers as they marched into Sherwood Forest. Just as the sun was beginning to set, it had taken far too long, in his opinion, to get permission to gather the troops, since Prince John had been busy when he first arrived back at the castle, map in paw. He later learned that meant the prince was taking a morning nap. Evidently, he'd had a rough night, filled with nightmares of his dear dead mother, and was taking the day off, demanding not to be disturbed for any reason. Eventually, the sheriff was able to track down Sir Hiss, who was more than eager to give the command to launch the attack in the prince's name. He allowed the sheriff to take 10 of his best rhino soldiers into the force, with orders to arrest Robin and any outlaws they found with him, and bring them back to the castle to stand trial. You must return him alive, Sir Hiss had commanded. Prince John wants to deal with him personally. It wasn't the largest army in the world, but the best that could be rallied on short notice, and the sheriff needed to get in there before darkness fell and their map was rendered useless. Besides, he thought as they pushed through the brush, they had the element of surprise on their side. Robin and his outlaws would have no idea what was coming for them, and once they realized what was happening, it'd be too late to launch any kind of counterattack. The fight would be over before it ever really began. The sheriff grinned wolfishly, glancing down at his map. He pictured the delight on the prince's face when he marched Nottingham's most wanted right up to his throne in chains. Why, maybe he'd even get a royal commendation. He imagined the horrified look on Maid Marian's face when she realized her precious outlaw had been nabbed. It made him smile. That would take her down a peg or two. The rhinos at the front of the march suddenly stopped suddenly. The ones following them slammed into their backs and cried out in protest. The sheriff frowned. "What's going on?" he asked. "Did I tell you to stop?" The head rhino gripped his spear tightly, his eyes darting around the forest. "I thought I heard a noise," he said worriedly. "It sounded like a ghost." He turned to the others, giving them knowing looks. "I heard there were deadly ghosts in Sherwood Forest, you know." The other rhinos looked a little frightened at this. They began to whisper among themselves. "I don't want to get killed by a ghost," cried one. The sheriff rolled his eyes. He reached up, grabbing a tree branch and shaking it. It groaned loudly. He gave the rhinos a pointed look. "You're ghosts?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. The rhinos looked at one another, not entirely convinced. For being so large, they weren't especially bright. "Come on," the sheriff commanded. "Keep going. It gets dark early this time of year. It'll be harder to fight if we can't see." They continued to clomp through the forest, their heavy steps far too loud for the sheriff's liking, especially from this captain fellow, who kept slapping his axe against the trees as he went, for absolutely no reason whatsoever. "Do you mind?" the sheriff demanded. "We're trying to launch a surprise attack here. The way you're clattering on, they're going to hear us a mile away." The captain bowed his head. "Sorry, my lord," he said. "I'll try not to." Oof! He bellowed as he tripped over a log and went flying. He landed hard on the ground. The other rhinos cried out in alarm, all trying to help him up at once. The sheriff groaned. Amateurs, the lot of them. Suddenly his ears picked up a strange sound in the distance, almost like a whistle. He tried to tell himself it was just more tree branches shifting, the forest's ghosts. But then it came again, and he wasn't sure. He motioned for the rhinos to stop for a moment. "Be quiet," he said. "I thought I heard something." "Ghosts?" asked the rhino in the rear. The sheriff didn't bother to answer. He looked down at his map. "We're getting close," he told them. "It's just over this hill and whoosh!" The sheriff froze. "What was that?" "Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh." He glanced to his left, his eyes widening to see an arrow sticking out of a tree. An arrow he was positive hadn't been there a moment before. "They're shooting at us! Take cover!" cried the captain, far too loudly. Though at this point it didn't seem to matter, for it seemed their surprise attack wasn't going to be much of a surprise after all.